You're out on the water, the throttle's down, and the boat just keeps climbing. You can't see over the front of the boat. The ride pounds your spine on every little wave. You burn through fuel like it's free. And you figure that's just how boats are. I thought the exact same thing for almost 20 years. Here's what I learned. The difference between a punishing ride and a glass-smooth one has almost nothing to do with your boat, your engine, or how much you paid. It comes down to one thing most people never adjust correctly. It's called trim. And when I finally learned to do it right, I cut my fuel burn, I stopped the pounding, and I got speed I didn't know my boat had. I didn't believe it either. I thought trim was a gimmick for fancy boats. I was wrong. Stay with me, because near the end I'm going to share a method I found buried in a boating manual from the early 1960s, before power trim was even common, that lets you find your boat's perfect ride using nothing but your own eyes and your wake. No gauges, no gadgets, and it works on almost any boat you own right now. Let me take you back to the day this all clicked for me. It was a flat, calm morning on a lake I'd fished for years. My buddy climbed aboard, we headed out, and the moment I pushed the throttle forward, the nose shot up toward the sky. For about 6 or 7 seconds, I was steering a boat that was pointing at the clouds, plowing a giant wall of water in front of me, going nowhere fast. My buddy just looked at me and said, "You know you can fix that, right?" I didn't. I honestly didn't. I'd owned boats for 2 decades and nobody had ever shown me. That morning changed how I ride, forever. And by the end of this, it's going to change yours too. So let me start with the thing that fooled me the longest. For years, I believed that a rough ride was the water's fault. Choppy day, rough ride. Calm day, smooth ride. Simple as that. I treated my boat like it was at the mercy of the lake. But that belief cost me money, comfort, and years of white-knuckle rides I never needed to take. Here's the truth I had to swallow. A boat has an attitude, not a mood, an actual physical angle it rides at as it moves through the water. Boat people call it running attitude. It's the angle of your hull relative to the surface of the water while you're moving. And that angle is the single biggest thing that decides whether your ride is smooth or brutal, whether you're fast or slow, whether you're sipping fuel or gulping it. When your bow is too high, you're doing what old-timers called plowing. The back of the boat squats down, the front points up, and you're basically pushing a wall of water uphill. When your bow is too low, you get the opposite problem. The nose digs in, the boat feels twitchy, and on a wave it can dart side to side in a way that'll scare you. Somewhere between those two extremes, there's a sweet spot. And in that sweet spot, everything changes. Now here's where it gets interesting, because this isn't new knowledge. This is old knowledge that got buried under gadgets and marketing. The physics of planing hulls, the way a boat lifts up and skims across the top of the water instead of pushing through it, was being studied seriously back in the early 1900s. Naval architects understood that the angle of attack, the tilt of the hull against the water, determined how much drag the boat fought. Too much angle, too much drag. The engineers who designed the fast patrol boats and racing hulls of that era knew that a difference of just 2 or 3 degrees in running angle could make or break a design. But regular boaters like me never got told any of this. We got sold horsepower instead. Bigger engine, bigger boast, bigger fuel bill. Nobody sat me down and said the angle matters more than the muscle. So let me tell you what actually controls that angle. Because once I understood this, I couldn't believe how simple it was. There are 2 main ways you control your boat's attitude. The first is engine trim, sometimes called power trim, and the second is weight distribution. Most modern outboards and stern drives can tilt the whole lower unit in and out while you're running. When you trim the engine in, tucked toward the boat, the thrust pushes the bow down. When you trim the engine out, angled away, the thrust lifts the bow up. That little button on your throttle, the one so many people never touch, is the difference between fighting the water and flying over it. I used to think that button was just for lifting the motor out of the water at the dock. I genuinely thought that was its only job. For years, I ran with my engine trimmed all the way down at every speed because that's where it happened to sit. I was fighting my own boat and I didn't even know it. So here's the part that partly settled my mind and then opened up a much bigger question. Once I understood that the trim button changed my boat's angle, I started experimenting, and the boat came alive. But that raised something I couldn't answer at first. If trim is this powerful, how do you know when you've got it right? Because pushing the button randomly just trades one bad ride for another. There had to be a method. And that's where the real secret lives. But before I get to the method, I have to tell you about the moment I got angry. Because once I figured out how much trim mattered, I started doing the math on what my ignorance had cost me. And the number made me sick. Let me walk you through it. Studies from marine researchers and boating educators have shown that proper trim can improve fuel economy by anywhere from 10 to 20%, and in some cases even more on the wrong hull run the wrong way. Think about that. I had been running my boat plowed out, bow high, dragging that wall of water for the better part of 20 years. Every single trip I was burning 10, 15, maybe 20% more fuel than I needed to. I didn't lose a few dollars. I lost thousands of dollars over the years, poured straight into the lake for absolutely nothing. And here's what really got under my skin. Nobody at the dealership ever mentioned it. When I bought my boats, I got a long walkthrough of the stereo, the cup holders, the upholstery, the fancy gauges. I got a sales pitch on the biggest engine they could talk me into. Not one person spent 60 seconds teaching me how to trim the thing so it wouldn't drink fuel and beat me up. Why would they? A bigger engine is a bigger sale. A fuel-hungry boat sends you back to the pump. Nobody makes a dime teaching you to run lean and smooth with the boat you've already got. The knowledge that saves you money is the knowledge nobody's paid to give you. So the smoothness and the savings got quietly buried under horsepower and accessories. And the simple skill that our fathers and grandfathers had to learn because they were running smaller engines that couldn't muscle through mistakes, that skill got forgotten. That made me want to dig deeper. Therefore, I went looking for how people used to do this before there was a fancy trim gauge for everything. And what I found surprised me. Power trim, the ability to tilt your engine while running with the push of a button, is actually a fairly modern convenience. For a long time, boaters trimmed their outboards manually, setting a pin at a fixed angle before they left the dock, and if it was wrong, they lived with it or they stopped and changed it. The button we take for granted came along and made adjustment easy, but easy is not the same as understood. We got the tool and lost the knowledge of how to use it. Then there's the trim tab. If your boat has them, or if you've seen those two metal plates mounted on the back of the hull down near the waterline, those are trim tabs, and their story tells you everything about how this knowledge slipped away. Trim tabs work on a beautifully simple idea. They're small, adjustable plates at the very back bottom edge of your boat. When you lower a tab, water pressure pushes up on that plate and it lifts that corner of the stern, which pushes the bow down. Lower both, and you bring the whole bow down and level the boat out. You can even use them one at a time to correct a boat that's leaning to one side because of an uneven load or a stiff wind. A company called Bennett Marine started making hydraulic trim tabs for everyday boats back in 1959 out of Florida. Before that, this kind of fine hull control was mostly the world of naval architects and racers. Suddenly, regular boaters had a way to adjust their ride on the fly. It was a genuine breakthrough for comfort and efficiency. But here's the thing. Having the equipment and knowing how to use it are two different worlds. I've stepped onto boat after boat where the owner had trim tabs bolted right there on the transom and had never once touched the switch. They'd paid for them. They just never learned. The tool survived. The knowledge didn't. So let me give you the knowledge, plain and simple, the way I wish somebody had given it to me 20 years ago. Here's how you actually trim a boat, step by step, from a standing start. When you first push the throttle down to get up on plane, you want your engine trimmed all the way in or your tabs down. This pushes the stern up and the bow down, which gets the boat up and over that hump quickly without the nose shooting sky high. This is the part almost everybody gets wrong. They floor it with the engine trimmed out, the bow climbs to the moon, and they plow for 10 full seconds, burning fuel and seeing nothing. Trim in first. Get up on plane fast and flat. Once you're up on plane and settled, that's when the real work begins. Now you slowly, Gently trim the engine out or ease the tabs up, a little at a time. As you do, you'll feel and see the bow start to rise. You'll watch your speed. And here's the magic. As you trim out, right up to a point, your boat will actually get faster on the same throttle because you're reducing the amount of hull dragging in the water. Less hull in the water, less drag, more speed, less fuel. You are getting more from the same engine. You keep easing it out until you find the edge. Go too far and you'll see the signs. The steering gets light and loose. The propeller may start to lose its grip and the engine speed will jump without more speed to show for it. That's called ventilation. And on some boats, the bow will start to bounce up and down in a rhythm. Up, down, even on calm water. That bouncing has a name, and it's the thing that used to terrify me before I understood it. That partly answers the question I opened with, how you know when trim is right. But that bouncing, that rhythmic porpoising is the exact thing that made me think my boat was broken. So let me tell you what it really is, because it's the clearest signal your boat will ever give you. Porpoising, that's what it's called, because the boat rises and falls like a porpoise leaping through the water. For years I thought it meant something was wrong with my hull. I thought maybe the boat was damaged, or badly built, or just too small for the water I was in. It's none of those things. Porpoising is almost always a trim problem, pure and simple. It happens when the bow is trimmed up too high, so only a small patch at the very back of the hull is touching the water. That little patch can't hold the bow steady, so the nose drops, then the extra hull grabs and lifts the nose again, then it falls, over and over, a few times a second. Your boat is basically hunting for a stable angle and can't find one because you've trimmed it past its balance point, and the fix is almost insultingly simple. When you feel that bouncing start, you trim the engine back in just a touch, or drop your tabs slightly until the bounce stops. That's it. The boat settles right down and glides. The first time I did that on purpose, watched the bounce start, tapped the trim in, and felt the boat go dead smooth, I actually laughed out loud. 20 years I'd been scared of a problem I could fix with a 2-second tap of a button. So now you can get on plain flat, trim out for speed and economy, and kill porpoising when it starts. That's more than most boaters ever learn. Before we get to the weight tricks, let's talk about the bigger cost that started long before you ever touched that trim button. Picture this. You just learned that one missed button cost you years of wasted fuel. Now imagine what else nobody taught you, starting with whether you overpaid for that boat before you ever turned the key. That's exactly what First Principles covers, the coin tap survey trick that can reveal a rotten, water-soaked hull in under 2 minutes before you hand over a dime, plus the plain questions that cut an inflated price back down to what the boat is really worth. Then there's deep leverage, which hands you the same few dollar fixes the yard would love to charge you a fortune for, done at home with basic tools, along with how to check and pack a trailer hub yourself so it never strands you on the highway. And the full system ties it all together. The buy and own routine, the running habits, and a season-by-season maintenance calendar so nothing rots, rusts, or fails while you are not looking. Here is something you can test tonight for free. Next time you are near any boat at the dock, even one that is not yours, tap a coin along the hull below the waterline and listen for a solid ring instead of a dull thud. That is the exact trick from the book, and it costs you nothing but a coin. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. Every season you keep guessing instead of knowing is another season of fuel and repair money quietly leaking out of that hull. Now let's get back on the water, because there is a whole other half to this trim story we have not touched yet. But there's a whole other half to this that has nothing to do with buttons and tabs. And this is the part I want you to hear, especially if you're sitting there thinking, my boat's too old for any of this, or my little boat doesn't have power, trim, or fancy tabs, so none of this applies to me. I made this next part for you, because the oldest, most reliable trim control there is doesn't cost a penny, doesn't need any equipment, and works on every boat that has ever floated. It's where you put the weight. Before power trim, before hydraulic tabs, before any of it, Boaters trim their craft by moving people and gear around, and it works just as well today. Weight in the back sinks the stern and lifts the bow. Weight in the front pushes the bow down. Weight on one side leans the boat that way. You are a trim tab. Your passengers are trim tabs. Your cooler, your tackle, your gas can, all of it is trim. So let me give you something you can do on your very next trip with the boat you already own, no matter how old or how simple it is. If your bow rides too high and you're plowing, move weight forward. Have a passenger move up toward the front. Slide the cooler ahead of the console. On a small tiller boat, scoot yourself forward on the seat or ask your passenger to sit ahead of you instead of beside you. You'll be amazed how much 150 pounds moved 4 feet forward changes the whole ride. The bow comes down, the plowing stops, and the boat settles onto its lines. If your boat leans stubbornly to one side, even in calm water, you've got a side-to-side balance problem. Shift a passenger or your heavy gear to the high side. On a small boat, this is night and day. I've watched a boat that listed hard to port come dead level just by asking one fellow to slide across the bench. And here's a free diagnostic anybody can do, tied up at the dock, before you even start the engine. Look at how your boat sits in the water at rest. Walk the dock and eyeball it from the side and from the back. Is it sitting level, or is the stern already squatting low because you've got 3 batteries, a full fuel tank, and all your heavy gear piled in the back? If it's stern heavy at rest, it's going to fight you the second you hit the throttle. Move some of that weight forward before you ever leave the slip, and you've won half the battle for free. This is the knowledge our grandfathers took for granted. They ran small motors that couldn't bully a badly loaded boat onto plane, so they learned to load smart and sit smart. We got big engines that let us be lazy and pay for it at the pump. The old skill still works. It never stopped working. We just stopped teaching it. Now let me tell you about the day all of this got tested hard, because this is where it stopped being theory for me. I took my boat out on a day that turned rough. Not dangerous, but a steady chop, the kind of day that used to hammer my back and rattle my teeth until I'd limp home early. This time I decided to use everything I'd learned. And I discovered something about trim in rough water that nobody had ever told me, and that flips the calm water rule on its head. In a chop, you do not want to run bow high and light. A bow high boat in waves lands flat and slams, because that big flat bottom comes down smack on the water. But you also don't want to bury the nose. What you want is to trim in a little more than you would on calm water, bringing the bow down just enough that the sharp forward part of your hull, the deep V up front, cuts into the waves first and slices them instead of belly flopping on them. That's what the pointed bow is for. Trimmed right, the boat knifes through the chop instead of pounding across the top of it. I brought my bow down a touch, backed my throttle off just slightly, and the whole character of the ride changed. The slamming turned into a firm, steady cut through the waves. My spine thanked me. My passenger stopped gripping the handrail. We rode home comfortable on a day that would have beaten me half to death a year earlier. Same boat, same waves, different knowledge. That's the thing I keep coming back to. It was never the boat. It was never really even the water. It was what I knew and what I didn't. So by now you can get on plain flat, trim out for speed and economy on calm water, kill porpoising the instant it starts, trim down and slow slightly to knife through, chop, and balance your load with nothing but where you sit and where you stow your gear. That's a complete education in boat handling that most people never receive. But I promised you a secret, and this is the one I'm most excited to hand you, because it's the piece that ties all of it together, and it comes straight out of the old way of doing things, before anybody had a gauge to stare at. Here's my problem with trim gauges, and I say this as someone who used to trust them completely. A trim gauge only tells you the angle of your engine. It does not tell you the angle of your boat, and it does not tell you what the water thinks. Two identical boats loaded differently need completely different trim settings, and the gauge can't see that. I spent months chasing a number on a dial, trying to remember what setting felt good last time, and it never quite worked, because the right setting changes every single trip depending on your load, your fuel, your passengers, and the water. So I went looking for how the old boaters did it before gauges, and I found the answer in the boating literature from the early 1960s, right around the time power trim and those first Bennett tabs were coming into the world. The instructors of that era, teaching people to run these newly adjustable boats, taught a method that needs no gauge at all. They taught people to read the wake. Here is the secret, and I want you to really hear it, because it will make you a better boat handler than people who've been on the water for 40 years. Your wake, the trail of water your boat leaves behind, is a live report card on your trim. It's telling you the truth in real time, and it costs nothing to read. Once you know what to look for, you'll never need to guess again. Here's how you do it. Get your boat up on plane and settled at your normal cruising speed. Then turn around, or glance back, and look at the water directly behind your boat, at the wake you're throwing. If your bow is too low, trimmed in too far, you'll see a big, wide, churned-up mess of white water behind you, and a tall spray coming off the sides up near the middle of the boat. That's your hull dragging too much surface through the water. That's wasted fuel and lost speed written right there on the surface. Now start trimming out, slowly, and keep watching that wake. As you trim out and lift the bow, you'll see the wake behind you get cleaner. The churning shrinks. The spray moves back toward the stern. The water your boat leaves behind starts to look flatter and calmer, and the rooster tail tightens up into a clean, crisp trail right behind the engine. You keep easing out until that wake is at its cleanest and flattest, the moment just before it starts to get ragged again or before the boat starts to porpoise. That clean, flat wake, with a tight trail right off the stern and minimal churning, is your boat telling you it has found its sweet spot. The least hull in the water, the least drag, the most speed and the best economy your boat can give you at that speed, with that load, on that day. The water itself is showing you the answer, and it recalculates automatically every trip, no matter how you're loaded, because you're reading reality instead of a dial. The first time I did this, I couldn't believe I'd spent 20 years never once looking behind my own boat. Everything I needed to know was written in the water the whole time. The old instructors knew it. They taught it plainly. And then the gauges came along and told everybody to stare at a dial on the dash instead of reading the water, and a simple, perfect skill quietly disappeared. You can do this on your very next outing. You don't need to buy a thing. You don't need a modern boat. You just need to get on plane, look back, and trim until your wake goes clean. That's a skill from over 60 years ago that will serve you for the rest of your life on the water. And once you start reading your wake, something else happens. You stop trusting numbers and start trusting your own senses. You feel the steering go light and you know you've trimmed out far enough. You feel the ride go smooth and you know your load is balanced. You hear the engine notes settle and you know you've hit your stride. You become the kind of boater who runs by feel and by sight, the way the best of them always have, instead of the kind who's a slave to a dashboard. Let me leave you with the whole picture, tied together, so it lives in your hands and not just your head. Get on plane with the engine trimmed in, flat and fast, no bow climbing to the sky. Once you're up and settled, ease the trim out slowly and watch your wake go clean, chasing that flat, tight trail that means the least drag and the best economy. The second you feel a bounce start, tap the trim back in and it's gone. When the water turns rough, bring the bow down a touch and slow just slightly so your sharp bow slices the chop instead of slamming on it. And through all of it, remember that where you and your gear sit is a trim control every bit as powerful as any button, free on every boat ever made. None of this costs $1. All of it was known long before the boat you own was ever built. Here's what I really want you to walk away with. You were never at the mercy of the water. You were only ever missing a handful of simple skills that somebody, somewhere, decided weren't worth teaching you when there was a bigger engine to sell instead. That smooth, quiet, fuel-sipping ride you thought belonged to other people with fancier boats was inside your boat the whole time. Now you know how to reach it. That's the kind of person I think you are, if you've stayed with me this long. Someone who'd rather learn the real skill than buy the expensive shortcut. Someone who trusts their own eyes and their own hands over a salesman's pitch. That's exactly who these old methods were made for. So let me ask you something, and I really do want you to answer. When you first pushed your throttle down before today, did your bow climb up toward the sky and block your view like mine used to? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. What water you run, a lake, a bay, a river, the open coast. I read them, and I love knowing where you all are. And if you want more of this, the recovered kind of practical knowledge that convenience and marketing quietly buried, come along with the rest of us who are digging it back up. Next time I'm going to show you the simple thing you can do to your propeller, or rather the way to check the one you already have, that quietly robs boats of speed and fuel without their owners ever suspecting a thing. Most people have never once checked it. You're about to be the exception. Before you go, here's where this goes next. Inside the Old Ways Almanac, I walk you through that wake reading trim method from the 60s manual, and step by step, so you can dial in your own boat. Ask me your own question right there, and I answer you myself, not some machine. You belong with the Old Ways folks already in there. Just point your phone at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, one click,